Welcome and 07 to this fourth and last section of the API C++ tutorial on how to connect an API with an HTTP request in Unreal Engine. If you haven't seen any of the previous parts of this tutorial series, you will find the links in the description. In the first section we set up the widget, and in the second section we set up the HTTP request and talked about the API we're using in the tutorial. In the third part of the series we made sure that we retrieved the correct set of data, and we also handled that data coming back through the response. In this section we'll leave the HTTP part behind and move into playing around with datetimes and timers. Pretty cool stuff. Before we move on, please take a second to like and subscribe. It helps the channel to beat the algorithm. Thank you for your support. Now let's get into the video. So far we created a request to an API and we received an answer. It's now time to start working with the received data. So we will leave the HTTP part behind and move into datetime and timers. Pretty cool stuff. So let's start out in the protected section of our H file. We will start by creating a break time function that will let us break down the datetime into its individual components. This will be a void function. Let's create the body. Our timer will be a 24-hour clock, so we need 3 variables to store our hours, minutes, and seconds. So in our private section, let us create those variables. They will all be of int32 type, and the first one will be called hour, second will be minute, and the third will be second. We can now go over to the CPP file and down to our break time function. I will start by adding some local variables that is demanded in the Kismet math library function that will help us break down the date time. So these values are not something I will be using in the project, but they are mandatory for this function. These will also be of int32 type, and they will represent year, month, day, and millisecond. Alright, let's add the uKismet math libraries function break date time. The first parameter we need is what variable do we want to break. For us that variable is the time variable that we created in previous section of this tutorial. And then we just run through the rest of the demanded variables. Year, month, day, hour, minute, second, and millisecond. Okay, so thank you Kismet for handling that for us. Let's add a comment to this. So we're going to add break the time variable and store the data within the individual variables. Okay, let's add this break time to the onGetTime response. So we get the data for the response and we store it in the time variable. And then we run the function breakTime to store the variables into their individual component variables. Okay, going back to the H file and down to the public section at the bottom, and add a new function that we can call from the blueprint. This is the function that will be called by the time section of our widget. And this will be a fText return function. We're going to call it getCurrentTime. And this needs to be a blueprint callable function that is being called from the widget. So let's create a U function and add the blueprint callable. Let's create a body for this and go back to the CPP file. Alright, here is the function. So let's think here for a second on what we actually need. We want to build up a string first, and then we can convert that to a text field, as I rather do it here in C++ than to bring a string into blueprints just to have it converted straight away. And I want it to look like this. So we have an hour section here, followed by a colon, and then minutes, followed by another colon, and then seconds. The next issue here is that if you store a value of 06 into an integer as time, it will be stored as a 6 and the 0 would be removed. So we need to add it again if it's needed. First of all, we want to create a string variable for each of the time segments. So they will be f strings, and the first one will be hours, the second will be minutes, and the third will be seconds. And please note that I added s's at the end of the words to differentiate them from the integer value. Okay, first of all, we want to start with the hour value. If the hour is less than 10, so it's a single digit, we want the hour string variable to be equal to the f string with a 0 inside the quotation marks, dot append, and here I want to put an f string function from int, and in the parentheses we put hour. So if it is, for example, 6, it will now be 06 as a string. Alright, so what do we want to do if it's not less than 10? Well, we want the hour string variable to just be the same as the integer hours. So that will be f string from int, and we just add hour. Alright, let's copy and paste this if else statement 2 times and change the hour to minutes. And same for the else statement. And then we do the same for the last if statement. We're adding second and seconds where needed. Alright, time to put a string together. We can create an f string named return string. This will be equal to the string hours dot append, and here we want to append a colon, so f string and add the quotation marks and a colon in between. I'm also going to add a space before the end quotation. Then we add another dot append, and this time you just want to add minutes. We can copy this dot append and minutes and paste it in at the end, and we change the minutes to seconds. Alright, now after this return statement, we just need to return the string we created, but it needs to be converted to an f text. So we add f text colon from string and add the return string. Save that and compile, and let's go back and hook it up. So back here in the editor, let's go into the HUD widget and into the graph section. First of all, let's get and store our game mode. Let's get the game mode. And then we need to cast it to our game mode that we are using. Let's promote this to a variable. I will name it game mode. Okay, let's go back to the designer. We are now going to bind a text block to the blueprint callable function that we just created. Let's drag in the game mode and get the current time function we just created. Let's hook that up to our return node. Okay, time to compile and save to test this out. So if we press the play button here, it shows us the time that we received from the API. That is awesome. Now this is a static text, something that just showed us what the local time in Tokyo was when we started the game. And I want a little bit more functionality than that. So let's go back to our gamemode.h file. And in this private section, let's add an f-timer handle called second counter. So this is a timer that will run our clock. Let's add the new float time variable that will control how fast our timer will run. So it's going to be called second count float. Okay, now we need a callback that can tell the system what will happen when the time has run out. So in this protected section, we can create a function called second counter callback. This will be a void function. And let's create the body. Now we can go back to our CPP file, and up in our initializer list, we can add our second count float variable and set the value to 1.f. Now, I want to start a timer, and where do I want to do that? Well, we want to start a timer whenever we start a function to retrieve the time. For simplicity's sake, let's just add it after I sent the HTTP request in the begin play. And to set the timer, we want to start by getting the world timer manager. So get world timer manager, set timer. This will be our second counter, the f timer handle that we created. The next parameter will be the this keyword. And then we need the callback that we created, so let's copy and paste this. Make sure that you have the address operator in start. And for the last parameter, we will add how long this timer will run. This will be the second count float, so basically 1 second. Alright, let's go into our callback function. So this will be called whenever our timer handle has run out. And the first thing I want to do is to update our time variable. The starting time that we got with the HTTP request is a datetime variable. We can add to this variable with something called fTimespan. So let's add time plus equal fTimespan. And this has a built-in function called from seconds. And in the parentheses, we can add 1 for 1 second. Now, timespan also have other functions, such as from millisecond or minutes or even days. So what this means is that the time is now 1 second more than when we started. Now we can use the break time function that will store new values in our hours, minutes, and second variables. And after this, we want to restart the timer handle. So let's copy it from the begin play and place it here in our callback function. Alright, so we just created an eternal clock with real-time basis. This is great if you want to create a sheet-free game with real-time base, as now your players are not able to up their system clock to fast-track your game. Alright, let's save and compile and test it out. Alright, back in the editor, let's press the play button and see the change in real time. And there we go, the time is ticking. The last thing we want to do is hook up the buttons, so let's go back and get that done. In the H file at the bottom of the public area, let's add a function to set the current city. And the parameter will be an enum. eCity, we're going to call it current city. Right, let's create the body and go over to the CPP file. In this function, we first want to say city is equal to current city, so we're setting that up. And then we want to add the send request function, so every time you press the button, a new API request will be sent. Let's save this and compile the file. Alright, back in the editor again, and let's go to the HUD widget. Let's go to the graph and get the onClick function for the buttons. Now we can drag out a copy of the gray mode. We'll drag off this and get the set current city we just created, and this should be set to Tokyo. Let's copy this and paste it for the other two cities. Hook them up and change this to London and the last one to New York. Okay, let's save this and test it out. We're pressing the play button, testing it out, and there you go. It's updating everything as needed, and the clocks are ticking away after we send the request. Okay, so this will conclude the tutorial series. In the first section, we talked about setting the widget up, and then in the second section, we set up the HTTP request. In the third section, we set up the URL and made sure that we handled the response. And here in the fourth section, we worked with the datetime and created some cool functions that we could use in our project. I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you learned something new. I would love if you push that like and subscribe button, as it would help out the channel. Until next time, on SwatPop Gaming, have a great day.